Hello YouTube, this is Historical Gunweave. We're going to be looking at 1989 proposed assault weapon bans, and every time I say assault weapons, imagine I have quotations up because it's a BS political term. But we're going to start with a little bit of background on 1980s gun laws. So you didn't have DC versus Heller, but 1980s was different. Machine guns were still affordable. You had imports until March 14th. You had imports of semi-auto AUGs or semi-auto FALs or semi-auto Chinese AKs in good configuration before the ban. So you actually had a lot of cool stuff. And, 1989, that's when the imports got shut down. That's part of the reason we're looking into all this. But anyways, back to the background. Keep in mind, stuff's different. Machine guns may be affordable, but they're still debated about you don't have the individual right to own and bear arms, because screw your rights, Then Firearms Owners Protection Act was passed, banned new machine guns, ammo's deregulated, peaceful journey laws, etc. Armor-piercing ammo was banned in the 80s because McCups, which if you get into it, it's actually pretty interesting, to be honest. But essentially, for cops' sake, we have to ban armor-piercing handgun ammo because cops are dying, even though if you look at the address and stuff, it seemed like cops not wearing their body armor was a big problem back then. But that's not subject of today's video. And reason we're examining this is the import ban. And a little bit of other general background is you have two assault weapons bans proposed by the Senate we're going to look at, and you have a couple different ones by the House. We're not going to look into all of them. We're just going to look into the Senate ones mainly. We'll briefly look at one of the House ones just to give you an idea. The Ruger letter was during this time with gun control in 1989. That was the magazine ban Bill Ruger pushed for. That'll be examined in the next video. SAMI is important, but not really for this video. They kind of take Ruger's stance with the magazine ban. But now that you have a little bit of an idea of the 1980s, surplus guns were cheap, imports were cheap. You had a pretty good used market on firearms stuff. Everything wasn't collectible like it is today, so a lot of stuff was cheaper. But we're going to start with the 1989 import ban. It banned all the cool stuff from being imported, for rifles at least. So if you want a FAL from Brazil, you can't get it anymore unless it's in neutered configuration with a thumbhole stock. You can't have an AUG imported in the original configuration. You can't get a Chinese Type 56 AK. And there's no evidence U.S. companies supported this import ban, but they're quiet about it, or like Ruger says they oppose it for the imports too, but they do nothing to help. Then in the summer, there's a study done to justify the government's import ban and make it permanent, because the March 14th ban is technically temporary. So that's why all these bans start coming forward, partially because of that, partially because they want to take advantage of a good strategy. And, that study was very biased on sporting purposes. Part of the reason sporting purposes get screwed for imports the way it is today. This was one of the earlier examples of that. There's also like the street sweeper shotguns and other stuff, but this is a pretty good example of it. And this is the first more done on not just like 2 or 3 guns. This is like over 20 guns, unlike the open bolt quote unquote bans and stuff like that. So, we'll get into the Senate version now. Senate version, one of them is Senate Bill 386, Assault Weapons Control Act of 1986. This was introduced February 8th, 1989. You could own an assault weapon if you owned it before this act. If you didn't own it before this act, screw you. You're not allowed to own it. And it's unlawful to possess large capacity magazine or large capacity ammunition belt. That's how they're defining it. And assault weapons, they just picked a bunch of guns. This is an example of some of them: Kalashnikovs, Uzis, MAC-10s, Tech-9s, Ruger Mini-14s, AR-15s, Beretta AR-70s, FN-FALs, FN-FNCs, AUG Street Sweeper, or any semi-automatic firearm with a magazine capacity exceeding 10 rounds. Does this mean for some guns like the Colt Sporter 1, which technically you might be able to argue, or like the Match Colts, you could argue those, but it's not really seen how a lot of these were loose. So do they mean if the gun's inserted with the mag, or do they just mean if it was designed that way? They don't explain. Secretary and Attorney General get to meet and publish a list of firearms they get to think are assault weapons, and the Secretary gets the power to bar a firearm from import and sale for 90 days if they suspect it's an assault weapons. Rimfires are not assault weapons unless the tube capacity exceeds 6 rounds. Essentially, the people who wrote this don't know much about guns. You're going to see that in the next bill. Senate Bill 747, the Anti-Drug Assault Weapons Legislation Act, Limitation Act of 1986, introduced April 11th, 1986. It removed the Mini-14 and the Tech-9. It added the Galil and some other guns to the list of assault weapons. This one, the main difference, other than removing the Mini-14 and the Tech-22 and adding a bunch of other stuff, is you have to have a 4473 filled out. This wouldn't be a background check form, because back then you didn't have the background check, but you had to have that form filled out, which is the firearm transaction record, which means technically they're going to know you have the gun. And the biggest thing is it kind of shifts the burden of proof on you. So if you don't have a copy of the 4473 and you own one, you're screwed. If you bought one privately, it doesn't explain what you do, because a lot of guns were privately purchased back in this era especially. If you possess it without a 4473, it's a crime and you can go to jail for that. So if you need to contact ATF for the 4473 if the dealer's out of business. If they're not out of business, you're just going to have to hope the dealer feels nice. It's essentially a watered-down version of the previous one. It allows pre-bans to be transferred. There's no magazine ban. It removes the Mini-14 from the list of assault weapons, but there's still no definition of an assault weapon. One of the House bills, H.R. 669, introduced January 27th. Assault rifle, if it holds 20 or more rounds, 6 rounds for shotguns. Specifically, quote, semi-automatic weapon originally designed to take a magazine of 20 or more rounds, unquote. No grandfather clause, turn it in or go to jail. Why? Because screw you and we hate you. Don't you know we hate you? And of course, cops are exempt. They're better than us. Cops are superior. You know, we have to worship them, so they're exempt. Military's exempt, all this stuff. But for civilians, you're screwed. They wanted to ban them because of a shooting January 17th, 1989 in Stockton, California. 5 school children died. They were killed with a gunman with a Chinese semi-auto AKM. That's why California passed their assault weapons ban. Anytime there's like a major political figure dying or a mass killing, they like to push gun control. Valentine's Day massacres, one example, which was mobsters dressed as cops or cops killing mobsters, depending on what you personally believe, not getting into that, is an excuse for gun control. JFK's assassination, they tried to push some stuff in response to that. Didn't happen, though, until 68. MLK, you know, they always have excuses. Very quickly, there's a crap load of stuff that was proposed in this time. Some of them were the ones we looked at. There was a handgun registration bill that seemed kind of sketchy, that I just skimmed at, to be honest. There's early versions of the Brady Bill with 7-day waiting periods. There was HR 1361 that prohibited concealed weapons like revolvers with barrels under 4 inches and safety drop tests, a whole bunch of weird stuff. And I mainly am doing this to explain the political climate in 1989 and a push for banning assault weapons, quote unquote, and magazines in general. Politicians always push BS. Many of the laws we have for guns were introduced in earlier years before they were eventually passed. That's why you see early Brady bills. That's why you see earlier assault weapons ban. Like, look at the 1993 assault weapons ban before we got the 1994 one. Pretty similar bill. Seems like same thing. They like to copy and paste a lot. They're lazy. But I'm explaining these to help you understand the political climate in 1989 and the push for banning firearms and magazines. And this is going to be significant for the next video. But the aftermath, Bill Ruger does get involved before Senate Bill 747 is introduced. And short version, he pushes a 15-round mag ban instead of one of these more complete bans that you see. Not excusing Bill Ruger, I kind of have issues with him because of that, especially after the Neil Knox stuff. He kind of seems like a sellout just to keep his own product safe and harm his competitors, which is a smart business move, to be honest. But, you know, a lot of people act like he's the closest thing to John Moses Browning in his era because he did a lot of stuff. But this video is also kind of designed as a background for my next video because I'm not going to go into this deep of length. And to be honest, I could go even deeper in length about this video. I don't think it's needed. I think people get the point. If people are really interested, maybe I can go into some of the other House versions of the assault weapons bans proposed, but I'm just trying to give some background for that video because in that video I'm going to give a much shorter background than this. And none of these are passed other than the import ban. Nothing's passed. And the March import ban is expanded to other manufacturers and made permanent that year. And I'll try to list some sources. I'll have them in the comments, but I mean in the description, but assuming I could get the YouTube verification thing done, they want for me to be able to show links for whatever reason. If video editing works like I hope it's going to work, I'll hopefully have it flash sometime around when I start talking about sources, just as a worst case scenario. Because I'm going to do the verification thing, I just need to get around to it. Anyways, thank you for watching. If you think I've earned a subscription, subscribe, or don't, up to you. Like the video, comment, let me know if you think there's anything that I should talk about in specific, anything you think that was bad, let me know.